The morning bell rang at 5:30, just like it had every single day for the past 43 years. Sister Margaret Catherine slowly opened her eyes and whispered a quiet prayer before her feet touched the cold stone floor. At 71 years old, getting out of bed took a little longer than it used to. Her joints creaked and protested, especially her hands, which had grown stiff and painful over the years. She moved quietly through her morning routine, careful not to wake the other sisters in their small, simple rooms. The hallways of St. Mary's Convent were dimly lit and peaceful at this early hour. Her worn slippers made soft padding sounds as she walked toward the chapel for morning prayers. But every morning, without fail, Sister Margaret Catherine took a small detour. She would walk through the main hall of the convent, where an old black piano sat against the far wall. It was a beautiful Steinway, probably worth more money than she had ever seen in her entire life. The wood was polished to a deep shine and, even in the dim morning light, it seemed to glow with a quiet elegance. Sister Margaret Catherine would pause there for just a moment, looking at the piano keys. 88 black and white keys that held so much possibility, so much music, so much beauty. Her fingers would twitch slightly, almost like they had a mind of their own. Sometimes she would take a step closer, but she never dared to actually touch it. The rule had been made very clear to her when she first arrived at the convent as a young woman of 18. Mother Superior had been firm but kind when she explained that the piano was only for special occasions and for sisters who had proper musical training. It made sense, of course. The piano was expensive and delicate, and not everyone should be allowed to just play around with it. Sister Margaret Catherine had nodded and accepted this rule without any argument. After all, she was just a simple girl from a poor farming family. What would she know about playing such a fine instrument? She had come to the convent with nothing but the clothes on her back and a heart full of grief after losing her parents. The sisters had taken her in, given her food, shelter, and purpose. It would have been ungrateful to complain about not being allowed to touch their piano, so for 43 years she had walked past that piano twice a day. Once in the early morning on her way to prayers, and once in the evening when she helped clean the main hall. Each time, she felt a strange pull toward those keys, like they were calling to her somehow. But she always kept walking. Her days were filled with other duties that kept her busy. She taught reading and writing to the local children who came to the convent school. Her classroom was small and simple, with wooden desks that had been used by hundreds of students over the years. The children loved Sister Margaret Catherine because she was patient and kind, never raising her voice even when they were being difficult. She also helped in the convent garden, growing vegetables that would feed the sisters throughout the year. Her knees hurt when she knelt to plant seeds or pull weeds, but she found peace in working with her hands in the rich, dark soil. There was something satisfying about watching tiny seeds grow into strong plants that would nourish people. In the afternoons, she would sit with the older sisters who could no longer do heavy work. She would read to them from religious books or just listen to their stories about the old days. Some of these women had been at the convent for 60 or even 70 years. They had seen so many changes in the world outside their walls. But through all of these activities, through all the years of service and prayer and quiet living, Sister Margaret Catherine could never completely forget about the piano. Sometimes, when she was working alone in the garden, she would catch herself humming little melodies. Her fingers would move as if they were pressing invisible keys while she weeded or planted. During evening prayers, when the whole community would sing hymns together, Sister Margaret Catherine's voice would rise above the others. She had a beautiful singing voice that seemed to understand music in a way that was deeper than just following along with the melody. The other sisters often commented on how lovely her voice was, but she would just smile modestly and say it was all for the glory of God. The hardest times were when the piano was actually being used. A few times each year, They would have special celebrations where Sister Agnes, who had studied piano before joining the convent, would play for the community. Sister Margaret Catherine would sit in the back of the main hall, listening to the music that filled the space like sunlight streaming through stained glass windows. During these moments, her heart would beat faster and her hands would actually ache with longing. She knew it was probably a sinful feeling, this desire for something she was not allowed to have. She would pray for forgiveness afterward, asking God to help her be content with the life she had been given. At night, lying in her narrow bed in her simple room, Sister Margaret Catherine would sometimes dream about music. In her dreams, her hands were young and nimble again, dancing across piano keys like birds in flight. She would wake up from these dreams with tears on her cheeks, though she was never quite sure if they were tears of joy or sadness. The other sisters knew her as a quiet, humble woman who never complained about anything. She was always the first to volunteer for difficult tasks and the last to ask for help when she needed it. If anyone had been asked to describe Sister Margaret Catherine, they would have said she was dependable, kind, and perhaps a little bit forgettable. Just another elderly nun who had spent her whole life serving God and others, but none of them knew about the music that lived inside her heart. None of them knew that when she looked at that piano each morning and evening, she was remembering something precious that she had left behind long ago. None of them could have guessed that their quiet, humble Sister Margaret Catherine carried within her a gift that had been sleeping for over 40 years, waiting for the right moment to wake up and change everything. Before she was Sister Margaret Catherine, before she ever set foot inside St. Mary's Convent, she was just Maria Kowalski, a thin, dark-haired girl living in a cramped apartment on the 3rd floor of a run-down building in the Polish section of the city. The year was 1962, and life was hard for immigrant families like hers. Her father, Stanislaw, worked 14-hour days at the steel factory across town. He would leave before sunrise, his lunch pail in one hand and his worn work boots clattering down the wooden stairs of their building. Maria would watch from their small window as he walked down the street with the other factory workers, all of them moving like shadows in the early morning light. Her mother, Katarzyna, took in laundry from the wealthier families who lived in the better part of town. Their tiny apartment always smelled like soap and steam. Wet clothes hung from lines that crisscrossed their living room, creating a maze of shirts, dresses, and bed sheets that Maria had to duck under as she moved around their home. Money was always tight. There were weeks when they ate nothing but potatoes and bread, and Maria learned not to ask for things she wanted. She wore hand-me-down clothes that were too big or too small, and her shoes had holes that she covered with pieces of cardboard when it rained. But despite their poverty, there was music in their home. Her mother would sing old Polish songs while she worked, her voice rising and falling with melodies that seemed to come from somewhere deep in her heart. Her father, tired as he was when he came home from the factory, would sometimes hum little tunes while he ate his dinner. Maria absorbed all of this music like a sponge soaking up water. She found herself humming along with her mother, creating harmony lines that seemed to come naturally to her. She would tap out rhythms on the kitchen table with her fingers, making up little songs about the pigeons that lived on their fire escape or the old man who sold newspapers on the corner. When Maria was 9 years old, everything changed. Her father was walking home from work one evening when he saw something unusual by the side of the road. It was an old upright piano, scratched and damaged, sitting next to a pile of garbage bags. Someone had thrown it away, probably because it was too broken to be worth fixing. Most people would have walked past without a second thought. But Stanislaw Kowalski had grown up in Poland, where his own mother had played piano in their village church. He remembered the sound of those keys, the way music could fill a room and make even the hardest day feel a little bit brighter. He convinced 2 of his co-workers to help him carried the piano up 3 flights of narrow stairs to their apartment. Maria's mother wasn't happy about it at first. They barely had room for the furniture they already owned, and now this massive, broken instrument was taking up half of their living space. But when Maria sat down at the piano bench for the first time and pressed one of the keys that actually worked, something magical happened. The sound that came out was beautiful, even though it was just one note. Maria pressed another key and then another and slowly began to understand that this collection of black and white keys could make music. The piano was in terrible condition. More than half of the keys didn't work at all, and the ones that did work were often out of tune. The pedals were stuck, and there were deep scratches across the wood where someone had tried to move it roughly. But to 9-year-old Maria, it was the most wonderful thing she had ever seen. She spent every free moment at that piano, teaching herself to play with just the keys that worked. She would listen to music on their old radio and try to pick out the melodies using only the 8 or 9 keys that still made sound. It was like trying to paint a picture with only 2 or 3 colors. But somehow Maria made it work. Her parents were amazed by how quickly she learned. Without any lessons or sheet music, Maria began creating her own songs. She would combine the Polish melodies her mother sang with rhythms she heard on the radio, making something entirely new and beautiful. When the family next door complained about the noise, Maria learned to play very softly, using just the tips of her fingers to barely touch the keys. She developed an incredibly gentle touch that allowed her to express the most delicate emotions through her music. As she grew older, her talent became more obvious. She could hear a song once on the radio and then play it back on her broken piano, filling in the missing notes in her mind. She began to understand how music worked, how certain combinations of notes created happiness while others created sadness, how rhythm could make your heart beat faster or help you feel calm. The other kids in their neighborhood would sometimes come up to their apartment just to listen to Maria play. She was shy and didn't like being the center of attention, but when she sat at that piano, she became someone else entirely. Her music spoke when words failed her. Her parents were proud of their daughter's gift, but they also worried about her future. They couldn't afford to pay for proper piano lessons, and they certainly couldn't buy her a real piano. They knew that Maria's talent was special, but they didn't know how to help her develop it. When Maria was 17, she started working part-time at a local bakery to help the family with money. She would get up at 4 in the morning to help make bread and pastries, then come home to practice on her broken piano before helping her mother with the laundry. Her days were long and tiring, but the music kept her going. She dreamed sometimes about playing on a real piano, one where all the keys worked and the sound was pure and clear. But she was grateful for what she had, and she never complained about the limitations of her instrument. Then, one cold February morning in 1981, everything changed forever. There had been an accident at the steel factory. A machine had malfunctioned, and several workers had been hurt. Maria's father was among them. Both of her parents died that day, and 18-year-old Maria found herself completely alone in the world. The other Polish families in their neighborhood tried to help, but everyone was struggling just to take care of their own families. In her grief and desperation, Maria made a decision that would change her life forever. She had heard about the convent on the other side of town, where the sisters took in young women who had nowhere else to go. She packed her few belongings, said goodbye to the broken piano that had been her companion for 9 years, and walked away from her old life forever. When she knocked on the door of St. Mary's Convent, she left Maria Kowalski behind and became someone new. She buried her musical past so deep that she convinced herself it had never really existed at all. December had always been the busiest month at St. Mary's Convent. The annual Christmas celebration was the biggest event of the year, and this year promised to be even more special than usual. For weeks, The sisters had been preparing for the evening service that would bring together hundreds of people from the surrounding community. The main hall had been decorated with garlands of pine and holly that filled the air with the fresh scent of winter. Candles flickered in tall brass holders, casting dancing shadows on the old stone walls. The wooden pews had been polished until they gleamed, and someone had even managed to get the old chandelier working again after years of being dark. Sister Margaret Catherine had spent the past 2 weeks helping with the preparations. She had polished the brass fixtures until her arthritic hands ached, arranged flowers in vases that would line the altar, and helped younger sisters hang decorations that required climbing on ladders. At 71, she wasn't as steady as she used to be, but she never complained about the extra work. The most important part of the Christmas celebration would be the music. This year they had managed to arrange for Brother Francis, the diocesan choir director, to come and lead a special program. He was known throughout the region for his beautiful arrangements and his ability to make even simple church choirs sound like angels singing from heaven. Brother Francis had arrived 3 days before the celebration, bringing with him sheet music for complex harmonies that would showcase the voices of the sisters. He had been working with them every evening, patiently teaching them the difficult passages and helping them blend their voices together in ways they had never managed before. Sister Agnes, who usually played piano for their regular services, had been practicing for hours each day. The music Brother Francis had chosen was much more challenging than anything she had played before, with intricate rhythms and chord progressions that required real skill. But she was determined to do her best for such an important occasion. The backup plan was Sister Catherine from the nearby convent of St. Rose, who was known to be an excellent pianist. She had agreed to drive over on the evening of the celebration, just in case Sister Agnes became ill or had any problems. Everyone felt confident that they were well prepared for any situation that might arise. The guest list for the evening was impressive. The local mayor would be attending, along with several city council members and their families. Many of the convent's most generous benefactors had accepted invitations, including the wealthy businessman who had donated money for the new roof and the family who had paid for repairs to the heating system, Father Rodriguez from the cathedral. Downtown would be giving a special sermon, and even some of the sisters from other convents in the area were planning to attend. It would be the largest gathering St. Mary's had hosted in many years, and everyone was excited about showing their community how vibrant and alive their little convent could be. But then, on the morning of December 23rd, everything started to go wrong. Sister Agnes was in the kitchen helping to prepare breakfast when she slipped on a wet spot near the sink. She fell hard, putting out her hand to break her fall, and there was a horrible cracking sound as her wrist twisted at an unnatural angle. The other sisters rushed to help her, but it was clear immediately that she had broken something important. At the hospital, the doctor confirmed their worst fears. Sister Agnes had fractured her wrist in 2 places and would need to wear a cast for at least 6 weeks. There was no way she would be able to play piano for the Christmas celebration, or for weeks afterward. Mother Superior tried not to panic as she called Sister Catherine at St. Rose Convent to make sure their backup plan was still in place. When she reached the other convent, she received more bad news. A fierce snowstorm had moved through the northern part of the state, dumping more than 2 feet of snow and making the roads completely impassable. Sister Catherine was stranded and would not be able to travel anywhere for at least several days. As the afternoon wore on, Mother Superior made phone call after phone call, trying to find anyone who could play piano for the evening service. But every pianist she contacted was either already committed to playing at their own church or was also stranded by the weather that had been causing problems throughout the region. By 4 o'clock in the afternoon, with just 3 hours until the celebration was scheduled to begin, Mother Superior was becoming desperate. The main hall was ready, the food was prepared, the flowers were arranged, and guests were already starting to arrive despite the cold weather. Everything was perfect except for the one thing that would make the evening truly special: Brother Francis tried to be helpful, suggesting that they could have the celebration without piano accompaniment, but everyone knew it wouldn't be the same. The music he had chosen specifically required piano support, and singing without accompaniment would make the sisters' voices sound thin and uncertain. Sister Margaret Catherine had been watching all of this unfold from a distance, helping where she could but trying to stay out of the way of the more urgent preparations. She had seen Sister Agnes fall and had helped clean up the kitchen afterward. She had observed Mother Superior's increasingly frantic phone calls and had noticed the worry lines deepening on the older woman's face. For most of her life, Sister Margaret Catherine had been content to remain in the background to be helpful, without drawing attention to herself. She had learned long ago that it was safer to keep her thoughts and feelings to herself, to let others take the lead while she quietly supported their efforts. But as she watched the panic growing in Mother Superior's eyes, something began to stir inside her chest. It was a feeling she hadn't experienced in more than 40 years. A sense of possibility mixed with fear and excitement. Her hands began to tremble, not just from arthritis, but from something much deeper and more powerful. She thought about all those mornings and evenings when she had walked past the piano, feeling that strange pull toward the keys. She thought about the music that still lived in her dreams, the melodies that her fingers remembered even though she had tried so hard to forget them. She thought about the broken piano in her childhood apartment and the hours she had spent creating beauty from those few working keys. Finally, as the clock on the wall showed 4:30, Sister Margaret Catherine made a decision that would change everything. She walked slowly across the main hall, her heart beating so hard she was sure everyone could hear it, and approached Mother Superior, who was still frantically trying to reach someone on the telephone. "Mother Superior," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need to tell you something important." Mother Superior looked up from the telephone with tired, worried eyes. She had been making calls for hours, and the stress was showing on her face. When she saw Sister Margaret Catherine standing there, looking nervous but determined, she tried to force a reassuring smile. "What is it, sister?" she asked, though her voice showed how distracted she was by their impossible situation. Sister Margaret Catherine took a deep breath, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. For a moment, she almost lost her courage and turned away. But then, she thought about all those people who were already arriving, expecting a beautiful Christmas celebration. She thought about Brother Francis, who had worked so hard on the music arrangements. She thought about her fellow sisters, who had put so much effort into making everything perfect. "Mother Superior," she said again, her voice shaking slightly, "I can play piano." The words hung in the air between them like something fragile and unbelievable. Mother Superior stared at her for a long moment, not sure she had heard correctly. "I'm sorry, sister. What did you say?" "I can play piano," Sister Margaret Catherine repeated, a little louder this time. "I know I was told never to touch the piano when I first came here, and I've always followed that rule. But before I came to the convent, before I was Sister Margaret Catherine, I could play. I learned when I was a child." Mother Superior set down the telephone and looked at the elderly nun with new eyes. In all the years Sister Margaret Catherine had lived at the convent, she had never mentioned anything about musical ability. She had always been so quiet, so humble, so willing to let others take the spotlight. "Are you certain about this, sister? The music Brother Francis has chosen is quite complex. There will be hundreds of people watching, including some very important guests. If something goes wrong?" Sister Margaret Catherine nodded, though her heart was beating so fast she felt dizzy. "I understand, Mother Superior, but I truly believe I can do this." I've been listening to Brother Francis practice with the sisters, and I've been following along in my mind. I know the songs. There was no time to really test her abilities or to think through all the possible problems. In less than 2 hours, the main hall would be full of people expecting a Christmas celebration that would lift their spirits and bring them closer to God. Mother Superior looked at Sister Margaret, Catherine's determined face, and made a decision that felt both desperate and somehow right. Very well, sister. God works in mysterious ways, and perhaps this is His plan. But I want you to understand that this is highly unusual, and it will be a one-time exception to our normal rules. The next hour passed in a blur of nervous preparation. Brother Francis was shocked when Mother Superior told him about their last-minute solution, but he was also relieved to know they wouldn't have to cancel the musical portion of the evening. He spent a few minutes talking with Sister Margaret Catherine about the program, and he was impressed by how well she seemed to understand the structure of the songs, even though she claimed to have learned them just by listening. Sister Margaret. Catherine went to her room to change into her best habit and to spend a few minutes in prayer. She asked God to guide her hands and to help her remember everything she had once known about music. She prayed for the strength to not let everyone down and for the humility to accept whatever happened as part of His plan. As 7 o'clock approached, the main hall began to fill with people. Families dressed in their finest clothes took their places in the wooden pews. The mayor arrived with his wife and teenage children, nodding politely to the sisters who greeted them at the door. The wealthy benefactors came in expensive coats and jewelry that caught the light from the candles and chandelier, but there were also ordinary people there, factory workers and shop owners, elderly couples and young families with small children, who squirmed excitedly in their seats. The main hall had never held so many people at once, and the air buzzed with conversation and anticipation. Sister Margaret Catherine stood in the back of the hall, watching all these people and feeling the weight of what she was about to attempt. Her hands were shaking, and she rubbed them together to try to warm them up. The arthritis pain seemed worse than usual, probably because she was so nervous. Brother Francis gave her an encouraging nod from across the room, and Mother Superior appeared at her side, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Are you ready, sister?" Sister Margaret Catherine nodded, though she didn't entirely trust her voice to work properly. She walked slowly toward the front of the hall, and gradually the conversations died down as people noticed the elderly nun approaching the piano. She sat down on the bench, her movements careful and deliberate. The piano was even more beautiful, up close than it had appeared from a distance all these years. The keys were clean and bright, and when she gently pressed one with her finger, the sound that came out was pure and clear. For a moment, the entire hall was completely silent. Hundreds of people sat waiting, not sure what to expect from this small, elderly woman who most of them had never really noticed before. Sister Margaret Catherine closed her eyes and took one final deep breath. Then she placed her hands on the keys and began to play. The first notes of Silent Night filled the hall, and immediately everyone could tell that something extraordinary was happening. Her touch was gentle but confident, and the melody flowed from the piano like water running over smooth stones. But she didn't just play the simple version everyone knew. She added harmonies and variations that made the familiar song sound fresh and new. People in the audience began to sit up straighter, leaning forward to hear better. The mayor's wife, who had been checking her watch just moments before, forgot completely about time. The small children stopped fidgeting and stared at the elderly nun with wide, curious eyes. But Sister Margaret Catherine was just getting started. As Silent Night came to an end, she smoothly transitioned into another Christmas carol, then another. Each song was more complex than the last, with intricate melodies that her fingers seemed to find effortlessly despite her arthritis. Then, something even more remarkable happened. She began to play pieces that weren't Christmas carols at all, classical compositions that she had somehow learned over the years, just by listening to them on the radio in the convent's common room. Her hands moved across the keys with a grace and precision that seemed impossible for someone her age, someone who claimed to have learned to play on a broken piano over 50 years ago. The audience was completely mesmerized. No one moved, no one spoke, no one even seemed to breathe. The music filled every corner of the main hall, reaching into hearts and touching souls in ways that words never could. Some people found tears running down their cheeks without realizing they were crying. Sister Margaret Catherine had become someone entirely different at that piano. All the years of quiet humility fell away, replaced by a musical spirit that had been waiting decades to be set free. Her arthritis didn't seem to bother her anymore. Her age didn't matter. She was simply a channel for something beautiful and divine to flow through into the world. For what felt like an eternity, the main hall was completely silent. Sister Margaret Catherine lifted her hands from the piano keys, and the last notes of Ave Maria seemed to hang in the air like incense, beautiful and sacred. She sat perfectly, still on the piano bench, almost afraid to move, almost afraid to break the spell that her music had cast over everyone in the room. Then, slowly, one person began to clap. It was an elderly gentleman in the third row, a man who had been coming to the convent's Christmas celebrations for over 20 years. His applause was quiet at first, respectful, but filled with genuine amazement. Within seconds, others joined him. The applause spread through the hall like ripples on a pond, growing louder and more enthusiastic with each passing moment. People began to stand up, first one or two, then entire rows, until the whole congregation was on their feet, clapping with an intensity that seemed to shake the old stone walls of the convent. Sister Margaret Catherine turned around on the piano bench, her eyes wide with surprise. She had never experienced anything like this in her entire life. The sound of hundreds of people applauding filled her ears, but more than that, she could see the emotions on their faces. There were tears streaming down cheeks, smiles that seemed to light up the whole room, and expressions of pure joy and wonder. The mayor was clapping so hard his hands must have hurt. His teenage daughter, who had been slouching in her seat and looking bored just an hour earlier, was now standing and applauding with tears in her eyes. The wealthy businessman who had donated money for the new roof was shaking his head in disbelief, as if he couldn't quite believe what he had just witnessed. But it wasn't just the important guests who were moved. The factory workers were clapping, just as enthusiastically as the city council members. The young mothers were holding their small children up so they could see the elderly nun, who had just created something so beautiful. Even the teenagers, who usually acted too cool to be impressed by anything, were applauding with genuine respect. The applause went on for what felt like 10 minutes, though it was probably only 3 or 4. Sister Margaret Catherine sat there, overwhelmed by the response, not quite sure what to do with herself. She had spent 43 years trying to be invisible, trying to blend into the background, and now suddenly she was the center of attention for hundreds of people. Mother Superior walked up to the piano, her own eyes filled with tears. She placed a gentle hand on Sister Margaret Catherine's shoulder and leaned down to whisper in her ear, "Sister, that was a gift from God Himself. I have never heard anything so beautiful in my entire life." Brother Francis, the diocesan choir director, was standing near the front of the hall with his mouth still hanging open in amazement. He had worked with professional musicians, had heard concerts in great cathedrals and concert halls, but he had never witnessed anything quite like what had just happened in this simple convent hall. As the applause finally began to die down and people started to take their seats again, word about what had happened began to spread beyond the walls of St. Mary's Convent. People pulled out their phones and started calling friends and family members, trying to describe what they had just experienced. "You won't believe what just happened," one woman said to her sister on the phone. "There's this elderly nun here who just played piano like she was some kind of professional concert pianist. I've never heard anything like it in my life." By the next morning, the story had spread throughout the entire city. The local newspaper sent a reporter to interview Sister Margaret Catherine, though she was so shy about the attention that Mother Superior had to convince her to speak with him. A story that appeared on the front page 3 days later was headlined, "Hidden Talent Revealed, Elderly Nun's Christmas Miracle," but the real change happened within the convent itself. The morning after the Christmas celebration, Mother Superior called Sister Margaret Catherine to her office. The elderly nun was worried that she might be in trouble for breaking the long-standing rule about the piano, but Mother Superior had something entirely different in mind. "Sister," she said, gesturing for her to sit down in the comfortable chair across from her desk, "I owe you an apology. For 43 years, we have had a treasure living among us, and we didn't even know it. That rule about the piano was made long ago, and perhaps it made sense at the time. But after what I witnessed last night, I realize that we have been wasting something precious." She paused, looking out the window at the convent garden where Sister Margaret Catherine had spent so many hours working in quiet solitude. "I would like to ask you to become our official music director, not just for special occasions, but for our daily services, for teaching the younger sisters, for bringing music into our lives in ways we never imagined possible." Sister Margaret Catherine was quiet for a long moment, trying to process what she was hearing. "But Mother Superior, I'm 71 years old. My hands hurt some days, and I worry that I might not be able to—" "Sister," Mother Superior interrupted gently, "age is just a number. What you have inside you, this gift that God gave you, doesn't get old. If anything, it gets deeper and more beautiful with time." And so, for the remaining 7 years of her life, Sister Margaret Catherine filled the halls of St. Mary's Convent with music. Every morning and evening service now included piano music that transformed the simple prayers and hymns into something transcendent. The other sisters began to look forward to these services in ways they never had before. She also began teaching piano to some of the younger sisters who showed musical interest. Sister Patricia, who was only 23 and had joined the convent just 2 years earlier, turned out to have a beautiful singing voice that blended perfectly with Sister Margaret Catherine's piano playing. Sister Anne, who was in her 30s and had always thought she had no musical ability at all, discovered that she could play simple melodies that brought her great joy. Word about the music at St. Mary's spread throughout the region. Other convents began sending their sisters to visit, hoping to learn from Sister Margaret Catherine's teaching methods. Families from the surrounding communities started attending the evening services regularly, drawn by the beautiful music that seemed to make their prayers feel more meaningful. The old piano, which had sat silent and largely unused for so many years, now sang every single day. Sister Margaret Catherine would sometimes stay after evening prayers, playing softly in the darkened hall, working through pieces she remembered from her childhood or creating new arrangements of the hymns they sang during services. On quiet afternoons, when her arthritis wasn't bothering her too much, she would teach piano lessons to children from the local community. Their parents would bring them to the convent, and Sister Margaret Catherine would patiently show them how to find the beauty hidden in those black and white keys. She never charged money for these lessons. Instead, she asked only that the children promise to keep music alive in their hearts, no matter where life might take them. Many of these children went on to play in their school bands or church choirs, carrying forward the gift that Sister Margaret Catherine had shared with them. When Sister Margaret Catherine passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 78, the funeral service was held in the main hall where she had first revealed her extraordinary gift. The piano was covered with flowers, and hundreds of people came to pay their respects to the woman who had shown them that it's never too late to let your light shine. Her story became a legend that was told and retold throughout the years that followed. It became a reminder that everyone carries hidden gifts within them, waiting for the right moment to be shared with the world. It became proof that a life of quiet service can be just as powerful and meaningful as a life spent in the spotlight. And every Christmas Eve, the Sisters of St. Mary's Convent still gather in the main hall for their annual celebration. A different sister plays the piano now, but before the service begins, they always observe a moment of silence in memory of Sister Margaret Catherine, the elderly nun who taught them that sometimes the most beautiful music comes from the most unexpected places.